Hallo zusammen und herzlich willkommen.
Hello everyone and welcome. As you can easily see, the weather is not on our side today. Just when I'm about to start telling you a bit about the car, it starts raining and it doesn't seem to stop. As you have already seen, our test car today is the new Cupra Leon. First of all, I've always been a Leon fan, but the Cupra Leon, the new one, is simply amazing. It looks really cool on the outside and even better on the inside. So, look at the steering wheel here, with these accents. The way it's designed, and then of course the highlight here, the start-stop button, right here on the steering wheel, like a real racing car. How cool is that, please? On the other side, there is a button to switch through the driving modes, which is marked with the Cupra logo, because it also allows you to enter the Cupra driving mode. But more about that later. Now I would say, start the engines. Well, and as you hear nothing. Why don't you hear anything? Well, the new Cupra Leon is available with different powertrains, including hybrid powertrains that can drive purely electrically, and that's exactly what we're sitting in here. But I'll tell you more about that in a moment. Since Cupra is no longer a seat equipment line but a separate manufacturer, the Cupra cars are logically available with different engines, just like any other manufacturer, and the Cupra Leon is no exception. There are petrol engines as well as plug-in hybrids. The plug-in hybrid is a combination of a 150 horsepower petrol engine.
Der Plug-in-Hybrid ist eine Kombination
And a 110 horsepower electric motor. There are then two variants, which together produce either 204 or 245 horsepower.
45 PS leisten.
We have the 245 horsepower version here right now. Now let's see what happens when I step on the gas here. Yes, it doesn't sound bad, and it's fun too. Together both engines accelerate the car from 0 to 100 in 6.7 seconds, or 7 seconds for the SD estate version, which is a bit heavier. The top speed is 225 kilometers per hour. It's already going well, so it's also fun. The soundtrack is not bad either, although it has to be said that it is of course helped along synthetically. The 1.4-liter petrol engine with 150 horsepower does not produce such a sound on its own.
Den Kraftstoffverbrauch für
Seat gives the vehicle's fuel consumption as 1.6 liters per 100 kilometers. Similar values can be found in other plug-in hybrid vehicles. Well, let's be honest, it will be a bit more in reality, in practice, but even if you use 4 or 5 liters, that's still a good value for a vehicle with 245 horsepower power and just these acceleration and top speed values. As I mentioned at the beginning, the Cupra Leon e-hybrid can also drive purely electrically. It has a range of just over 50 kilometers. Regardless of whether you have the 204 horsepower or 245 horsepower hybrid under the bonnet, and regardless of whether you drive the 5-door or the SD estate.
The
general driving impression in the Cupra Leon is really pleasant. Well, I have currently selected the normal mode here and the vehicle just glides along. The road here is now relatively uneven, and yet I have the feeling that it is already very comfortable in here. If I then switch here, for example, to Sport mode or even to Cupra mode, then everything becomes firmer. The accelerator pedal responds much sooner and the steering is also much firmer. I think it's impressive how great the Cupra Leon is at balancing normal driving with the possibility of sporty driving. I mean, if you drive a hybrid, you will try to be as efficient as possible most of the time. As little fuel consumption as possible, as relaxed as possible, and still, when you want to step on the gas a bit, let off steam, you can do that here with the Cupra Leon without any problems. So very cool, I like it a lot.
Gefällt mir gut. Eine Sache, die mir hingegen
One thing that I don't like so much, and that was also the case with my Golf brother, are the touch surfaces for the climate control and the volume. I'm more of a button person, but the good thing is, at least for the volume, you can still adjust it here on the steering wheel. Unfortunately, there's no way around the air conditioning, possibly with voice control, but I'm not a fan of that either.
möglicherweise mit der Sprachsteuerung, aber davon bin ich auch kein Freund.
Sure, all the shortcuts are here on the touchscreen, navigation, phone, apps, vehicle data and so on, they're all here, but I always find it a bit more practical to have actual physical buttons. You have to give this design credit for one thing, though, and that is that the whole thing is extremely uncluttered. It looks very reduced to the essentials. I like it very much, at least visually.
Wie man sieht, es gibt hier natürlich ein digitales Kombi-Instrument und man kann hier zwischen
As you can see, there is of course a digital instrument cluster and you can switch between different views. Here it's classic, digital but with a rev counter and speed indicator. Then there's a slightly adapted, sportier version, a bit fresher, more dynamic, with the whole thing on the outside. Next, here for the driver assistance systems, or with the navigation map, or simply compressed from the most important, the speed and a few small displays around it. Or, combined here, the rev counter on the outside and the speed in the middle. By the way, the start button, which is here on the steering wheel, is in the normal seat Leon down here in the middle. Here in the Cupra, we have the option of switching off the ESP instead, as befits such a sporty vehicle. Of course, it's not for public roads and everyday traffic, but if you want to take your Cupra to a race track, for example, it's nice to have the option to switch it off directly and not have to look for it somewhere. Of course, the Leon is not only available as a Cupra, but also as a normal seat Leon. That's what we're sitting in here. There is a whole range of different drive variants. This shows that the Leon is a very important model for seat. You can choose between petrol, diesel, plug-in hybrid, mild hybrid, and even a natural gas, CNG, version of the Leon.
Und diese Technologie findet auch prominente Befürworter wie den Schauspieler David Cross.
Als ich das erste Mal davon gehört habe jetzt von
When I heard about it for the first time, now also from seat, I was totally impressed. This biogas is, so to speak, the amount of CO2 that was absorbed by the plants, which is then released again. This makes it climate neutral, so to speak, in terms of the idea. Then, of course, there are things you have to pay attention to, that this whole production is safe and that you don't emit any gases in the process. But I still think it's a great idea, because it's much more environmentally friendly, and the fact that you can fill up for €15 is also a really great addition, I'd say. We are now sitting in the 2-liter diesel, the larger of the two available diesels. It has an output of 150 horsepower and accelerates the car from 0 to 100 km per hour in 8.8 seconds and up to a top speed of 220 km per hour.
Der Preis für ein
The price for a 90 horsepower entry-level seat Leon is 20,570
Das
euros.
Interessantere an dem Diesel ist natürlich für
The much more interesting thing about the diesel is, of course, for frequent drivers, you can easily achieve fuel consumption of less than 5 liters per 100 kilometers. Seat claims 4.7 or 4.8 liters, and yes, that's about what I've experienced here in the car, so from that point of view the car is definitely suitable for long distances. Speaking of suitability for long distances, when I look at the road here, it's not particularly good in terms of construction. The surface is a bit worn, you can hear it rattling from time to time, but that's not because of the car. It's because of the camera. Otherwise, I think it's very pleasant to drive in here. It's not necessarily very loud, although the tarmac is a bit rougher, but bumps are absorbed well. I also find the seats quite comfortable, so nothing to complain about. Here in the normal Seat Leon.
Seat Leon.
You can get a diesel Leon from 25,000 euros. These Cupra Sports seats are relatively comfortable. Well, I wouldn't have thought that when I first looked at them. What I have to say, though, is that for me it's okay. I sit very well here, I'm held well, but if you're a bit wider at the bottom, I'd say, then of course it could be that you feel a bit cramped or squeezed here. But, as I said, this is perfectly fine for me.
Cupra ist natürlich nicht nur eine Marke.
Cupra is of course not only a brand for sporty drivers and fans of sporty design, but also for real petrol heads, i.e. people who want to have the smell of petrol in their nostrils and really step on the gas. That's why the Cupra is also available with a petrol engine, a 2-liter TSI with 245 or 300 horsepower. The 245 horsepower version goes from 0 to 100 in 6.4 seconds, the 300 horsepower version even in 5.7 seconds. But that's not the end of the line. There is also the top of the line version, and that is the Cupra Leon ST with 310 horsepower and all-wheel drive, and it accelerates from 0 to 100 in under 5 seconds. So it doesn't get much more awesome than that.
Ja, mein Fazit.
Yes, my conclusion about the